Good morning, everyone. I think we're about to start. Okay. So good morning, everyone, and thanks for being here at this Connect Summer University session on the European paradigm for a safer digital world. Now, this particular session will start with me presenting the newly adopted Cybersecurity Act, and in particular the European Cybersecurity Certification Framework. And then our other speakers will touch upon broader issues dealing with trust, assurance, and confidence in the digital world. So without further ado, I will begin my presentation on the European Cybersecurity Certification Framework. Now, it's important to remember that apart from this latest piece of regulation, the Cybersecurity Act, the European Commission and the EU in general has over the years taken many policy or legislative initiatives in a holistic and systematic manner in order to address cybersecurity, cybercrime, and international aspects linked to cybersecurity. So here on this slide, you can see the actions that were present in a joint communication on resilience, deterrence, and defense, building a strong cybersecurity for the EU. And there you can see that the Cybersecurity Act encompasses two main actions. First, a new mandate for ENISA, the EU Agency for Cybersecurity, and of course the EU Cybersecurity Certification Framework, which will be the topic of my presentation. But as I said, cybersecurity needs a holistic and systematic approach. For example, I would like to point you to a recent development, that of Council decision of 17th of May concerning restrictive measures against cyber attacks threatening the Union or its members. In simpler words, this is a new regime for sanctions, economic sanctions, that can be leveraged against individuals who would threaten with their malicious cybersecurity activities the Union. So we see that in order to address cybersecurity, we can go from the very technical, such as cybersecurity certification of products and services, but to the more abstract and political, such as imposing economic sanctions on malicious third parties. Now, before we jump into the Cybersecurity Act, I would like to introduce to you a few key concepts that are important in our understanding of why we came forward with a cybersecurity certification framework. The first very important concept, also introduced in the Cybersecurity Act in law, but of course well known to many, is that of security by design. What do we mean by security by design? We mean that cybersecurity should be ensured throughout the whole lifetime of an ICT product, service, or process, and taken into account during the design, development, and deployment of any solution. And it has to constantly evolve in order to reduce the risk from harm of malicious exploitation. I think it is safe to say that today, in the times we are living, the occurrence of cybersecurity attacks should be presumed and their impact should be anticipated and minimized. I think nobody can honestly say that cybersecurity is not an issue for any of their products or services. When we talk about cybersecurity certification, we talk about attaining certain objectives. This is what we call in the Cybersecurity Act security objectives. This is what the products, the certified products and services are meant to attain. And what are these objectives? Well, in words that are familiar to those working with cybersecurity, perhaps not to everyone, it's all about protecting the availability, authenticity, integrity, or confidentiality of stored or transmitted or processed data, or the functions or services offered by accessible via these product services and processes throughout their lifecycle. So we need to protect products and services. We need to make sure that they keep running. We need to make sure that confidential information is kept confidential, that the integrity of information and data is preserved. And of course, what is certification? So simply put, it's the provision of an assessment, an impartial third-party attestation based on a decision following specific rules and procedures that fulfillment of specified requirements has been demonstrated. In perhaps simpler words, it's the fact that an independent third party assesses the product or the service and issues a certificate, an attestation, saying that those services and those products meet the specified requirements. Of course, in order for certification to be meaningful and successful, we need to trust that third party, that they are competent to assess. But in order for it to have an impact on the real-world security, we need to choose the right requirements and the right evaluation methodologies. So, when it comes to the European Cybersecurity Certification Framework, the European Commission believes, and now the Union also, that cybersecurity certification can play an important role in increasing trust in digital products and services. I stress that certification can play a role. It's not a silver bullet that will solve all solutions. That is why I pointed to the holistic manner in which we address cybersecurity in the very beginning of my presentation. And how can the certification play this role? First, by addressing the needs of consumers and end users, by giving them more confidence in the security of a product, but also providing information to allow users to make better decisions, providing a sense of transparency in the security of the products. But there are also supply-side benefits. Certification can allow a company, a supplier, to demonstrate to the market that their product has been evaluated by a third party, an independent third party, and that it does indeed fulfill specific requirements. In our digital single market, a common approach to cybersecurity certification is, of course, very important. When we started this initiative, it was clear that having a different approach, different cybersecurity certification schemes operating different member states made the lives of companies, but also individuals, more difficult. For companies, it may have meant that they needed to certify their product in more than one way, in more than one country, adding to the cost and the burden of certification. And for individuals, of course, a plethora of certificates or labels could simply confuse them. It was also clear that we needed to build on what existed. There were certain certification schemes present in the European Union, which would be a starting point. But it also became clear that when you want to certify something as small as a microcontroller to something as big as a cloud service, you cannot have one set of standards or one set of requirements, nor one set of evaluation methods that could fit them all. Therefore, we came to the conclusion that we don't need one certification scheme, but many. And this was the concept behind the framework, that we have one framework that will allow the establishment of many schemes. But let's see now what a European cybersecurity certification scheme looks like. It starts with a definition of the scheme. So an EU certification scheme specifies a series of elements, notably the evaluation procedures and cybersecurity requirements. And it does so by reference to international, European, or national standards and technical specifications. So these standards collect both the cybersecurity requirements that the product or the service or the process has to meet, but also the evaluation methodology, the assessment. How do you assess that these requirements have been met? A central role in the certification scheme is that of the independent third party, the party that will actually do the evaluation and issue the certificate. So there at the center of certification schemes, we see the conformity assessment body or the evaluation facility, which applies the evaluation process in order to assess the conformity of the product to the cybersecurity requirements. If the assessment is successful, then the conformity assessment body issues a certificate attesting to this fact. And of course, the whole point of the European Cybersecurity Certification Framework and all its schemes is that this certificate is then recognized by all EU member states. Now, of course, in order to be able to trust that the conformity assessment body is doing its job well, first, we have the concept of accreditation. So the national accreditation body in each member state accredits that the conformity assessment body knows how to do its job, that it's independent, that it's free of conflicts of interest. And in parallel, reinforcing trust and oversight, each member state will set up a national cybersecurity certification authority. One of its tasks is to actually authorize conformity assessment bodies to be part of each scheme. And when it does so, it will also notify all other member states and the European Commission that that particular conformity assessment body is part of the scheme. So this, in essence, is what makes up the European Cybersecurity Certification Scheme. Now, how do we go about setting up cybersecurity certification schemes? Well, it begins with planning. So the Commission needs to let the world know, industry, stakeholders, standardization bodies, about its plans for future cybersecurity certification schemes, to give them a kind of a heads up of what's coming in order to allow, for example, standardization bodies to prepare or to flag the existence of relevant standards, to allow labs or conformity assessment bodies perhaps to train their personnel or to, in order to be capable of being part of the scheme. Now, in order to help us plan, the Act also foresees the Stakeholder Cybersecurity Certification Group. This is an expert group made up of stakeholders from standardization, industry, conformity assessment bodies, accreditation bodies, anybody from the private sector who has an interest in cybersecurity certification may apply, and the call will open soon to become a participant in the Stakeholder Cybersecurity Certification Group, which will advise the Commission on what we call strategic aspects, so looking forward into the needs for future schemes or any other issue linked with cybersecurity certification. But we also have a group for member states' authorities, which we call the European Cybersecurity Certification Group. They too will advise the Commission as regards its planning for future schemes. Now, once we have this plan, the next phase is a request to ENISA. So the Commission will issue a request to ENISA, the EU Agency for Cybersecurity, to actually start preparing the scheme. Preparing the scheme means identifying all that series of those elements that I showed you in the previous slides. So identify which standards are relevant, which evaluation methods, what is the scope, what products will be covered. There's a whole list of elements that a scheme must detail, and ENISA has the important task of detailing, of preparing that scheme. Again, ENISA will work with our member states, but also it has an obligation to set up a so-called ad hoc working group with technical expertise from the private sector. As you can see on the top, both the Stakeholder Cybersecurity Certification Group and these ad hoc working groups of ENISA ensure a very important participation of stakeholders in the planning, but also the preparation of each scheme. Once ENISA has completed the preparation, it transmits what we call a candidate scheme to the European Commission, which then, based on ENISA's work, may adopt or establish the scheme legally through what we call an implementing act. And once the scheme is implemented, of course, there are procedures to maintain the scheme, take a look at the standards, make sure that they're still applicable, but also review. So each scheme will be reviewed every 5 years officially to make sure that it responds to the needs of the market. So, as I mentioned before, we have this concept of one framework and many schemes. Each scheme tailored to the types of ICT products, services, or processes that it's meant to cover, and taking into account what we call cybersecurity risk. It's important, this notion of taking cybersecurity risk into account, or a risk-based certification, is very important, because depending on the product, depending on the service, depending on its use, the security requirements or the assessment methods may differ. In a high-risk scenario, you might want more assurance, more confidence in the fact that the product meets the requirements. And that may mean a more costly or more burdensome evaluation procedure. We have to be careful to make this connection between assessment, certification, and risk very carefully. We do not want to overburden companies, but on the other hand, we do not want insecure or risky products ending up in critical areas. Next, it's very important for the whole certification framework governance to be open, inclusive, and transparent. As we talk about the single market, we need to make sure that there's no so-called certification hopping, that a company will identify that one member state or one conformity assessment body is easier to get a certification done. So we've put in place trust-building mechanisms, such as peer reviews, to make sure that there's a uniform application of certification schemes across the EU. And we've also taken care to address well-known critiques or criticism leveraged at certification, that it's static, it takes too long, it cannot cover modern development processes. So in order to exactly take into account dynamic nature of modern software and hardware development, we've also provided for the certification the possibility to certify processes such as secure development or vulnerability handling. You have a product, you put it on the market, a week, a month, 6 months later, somebody discovers a vulnerability. A certified company should be in the position to handle that new vulnerability, fix it, patch it, and then put the new version, the secure version, back onto the market. But we also know that a secure product is not enough to ensure, let's say, the cybersecurity of a system. A secure product configured in the wrong way is as much as a threat as an insecure one. So the suppliers and vendors of certified products and services will need to provide the necessary information to allow users to configure and deploy the services securely. They need to provide information on patched vulnerabilities and mitigating measures. So if there's a vulnerability, while you wait for the patch, how you can mitigate the risk. And very importantly, they need to provide a contact point or an email address or some kind of contact point for those well-meaning security researchers that identify vulnerabilities to be able to let the vendors know that their products are vulnerable. So that would be it from me, setting the scene for the very interesting discussion that will follow. So the next speaker is Egon Berghout. I nearly got it right. Egon is academic director of the IT auditing and advisory program Erasmus Universities and passionate about educating the best digital risk and security experts. He is also a member of the EC Cloud Policy Working Group for Cloud Security Certification. Egon runs his own IT governance and assurance practice. He is a member of the Supervisory Board of the Dutch Courts of Law and was member of the independent committee which investigated the failure of the new Dutch citizens administration system on behalf of the Dutch Parliament. Egon's talk is entitled The European Opportunity for a Safer Digital World, Security Lessons from the Car Industry. Egon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's always nicer to address everybody standing up. Good morning. Congratulations with the Cybersecurity Act passing last week. My name is indeed Egon Berghout, and I'm the academic director of the IT auditing program of Erasmus University. We have about 70 students are enrolled in IT auditing right now, and I participated in the first certification scheme development program on behalf of NOREA, the Dutch IT Auditing Society, and together with Tom Vreeburg, who's also present here. And we, in the Netherlands, we have about 1,800 postmaster certified IT auditors, which I always find very impressive for such a small country. 18, but we have a substantial digital hub in the Netherlands. Where we are one of the most connected countries in the world. And we also try to keep that safe. My sheets are in black, and in my daily life I'm not such a depressed person. In fact, I'm quite optimistic in cyber, and still optimistic. But that is because I want to invite you into, I want to open up the black box of cybersecurity with you. And so let's have a look inside the black box and see what is going on over there. What are the key concepts, and how do these certification schemes help us to make a better, more safer world? And what is it that we have to keep in mind to avoid serious mistakes? And that's why I said what digital may learn from the car industry. So car industry is extremely well developed. They also have their incidents every once in a while. And everybody knows the problem with the emission standards. So very well established certification scheme for emission standards, and then everything goes wrong. So what can we learn from these guys? And in order to address that, I have three, I think, very fundamental questions. First, is it possible to avoid all digital stuff before my retirement? I work a lot with medical people or lawyers or whatever, and they always ask me, Egon, can you make this disappear? So that is, I think, a very fundamental question that we need to address. Second, is it possible to build a safer digital world with safety standards? Then the third question is, if the answer is no to the first two, what options are left? So also gives you an idea about my opinion about the certification scheme, which I like a lot, but we have a few issues left. Let's first look at the most important question. Is it possible to avoid most digital stuff before my retirement? So I have good news and bad news. If you happen to retire next week, and you live very remote and you like to grow your own vegetables, I don't know, you might end up well. But last week we had our 30th birthday of the IT auditing program at Erasmus University, and I thought, when I started to work in this area and I went to a major data center, my mobile phone these days is about as powerful as that data center was 30 years ago. They are approximately the same. And if you think about that, and everybody knows Moore's law, that the chips are increasingly small, double in power each year. You can say that, of course, at some point in time, Moore's law will decrease, but right now it doesn't. So the assumption that within 30 years, your mobile phone will be as powerful as a serious data center is right now is reasonable. You might end up lucky that it is less powerful, and you might end up very unlucky that it is even more powerful. And if that is the case, that means that, calculating your DNA will be an app on your phone. Adopting medicine to your personal needs will be an app on your phone. That means that within 30 years, people will look at our medical systems as we have it today as Middle Ages, you know, horrible, focused on average people, not working at all. So if you look at it that way, our future is extremely scary. So we will, based on those technological developments, and that is at the core, if the technology development continues, the applications will follow. We will build a complete new society in 30 years, and it better be safe. Otherwise, we are in deep trouble. And that is Schumpeter. That's a very old economic philosopher, very old. It's economical theory that we are extremely aware of. And that's not much we can do with it, except making it safe. So we better put in some effort. So that means we have to come up with a lot of certification schemes to make it safer. So when I make the comparison with the car industry, I thought, what is a great example of a certification scheme in the car industry that really worked? I don't know if anybody of you says, oh yeah, that was a safety standard that really made cars. No, everybody starts saying, well, I am not aware, I only know problems in the car, but I found one. And that is car crashes. And if you look at this is the BMW 3 Series 1997, it only had, not even had 2 stars for injuries in the BMW 3 Series, which was a popular car at that time. And then we introduced safety standards, and then within 10 years' time, the 3 Series had 5 stars. And, you know, did all the BMW buyers look at, oh, we do not have 5 stars? No, they didn't. You know, it's a kind of an issue. When you buy a car, you don't want to, there are certain cars you don't want to be in. But it is, you know, it's an element in your purchase. Was it the most important thing for BMW? No, it wasn't. So why did this work? Why did this work when it wasn't really important? It was very transparent. Everybody could see the funny movies on the internet. Seeing cars crash. That is funny. So before you buy, you could, I don't know how many people looked up their car before they bought it? See how it crashed? Some people do that, but not everybody does. So it's not an issue for everybody. But it is transparent. And you could also see that the crash test made sense. Very transparent. It's a homogeneous product. You know, not all none of the cars are identical, but they have to do the same kind of job. You have to drive in your car. So it's quite a homogeneous, so that makes the comparison useful. And we have third-party assurance. So it's not BMW that says, my car is safe, because all the manufacturers would say, my car is the safest car in the world. But we had NCAP saying, hey, this car is really safe to this extent. So I think that these 3 elements are very important if we want to have certificate. It has to be transparent, it must be a homogeneous product, and we need third-party assurance. And if you look at the failures, I don't want to address all, I don't want to make people feel like a failure or something, but if you look at the failures that everybody is aware of, you will always see that something goes wrong in either of these three elements. Most of the time it's third-party assurance. So it's a manufacturer that claims, you know, my product is really awful, or, in the sense of good. And then in fact it isn't. You know, if you open up the boot, he made a, but that's going to change in the next version. So I think these three elements are really important if we look at certification schemes. Now, if we look at IT, do we have a homogeneous product? No, we don't. You know, we have hospitals. Hospitals are very aware of privacy problems. And we have banks, they are very allergic for integrity problems. So we have all these kinds of different systems. You know, if you want to write a certification scheme for a tank or a car, that's a huge difference. Yeah? And that's the same in IT. So even if we talk about cloud certification, we will have a lot of different cloud users. And we have to, somewhere in our program, we have to address that issue. And that is a difficult issue. So if I want to understand cybersecurity or any security problem, I always think about this picture. My Sherlock Holmes. And Sherlock Holmes is doing his investigation. And in this case, he's trying to look at a house. Could be a car, could be something with cybersecurity. He wants to know what's going. He wants to know that house in the best possible way. But he's looking through his looking glass. That is his certification scheme. And I think that the one thing that you have to keep in mind, if you look through the looking glass, so if you look through your certification scheme to your house, you always see less. You do not see the house, but you only see the elements of the certification scheme. And so looking to a house or a cloud through a certification scheme, you have to be very aware that you do not miss the most vital points when you are doing your analysis. So you will always have to look at risks. So if you are a cybersecurity expert, that is the first thing you're going to do when you look at, when you want to help your client. You're going to look at your house and that you identify the risk for that particular client. And that is different for a hospital and different for the military and different for a car. Then you're going to develop your certification standard. And you're going to address issues like confidentiality, integrity, and availability for that particular client. Of course, for a tank, it's nice if it keeps running, if availability is high. And the third element that is on this picture is Sherlock himself. And right now we have this program that you are either certified or not. But yeah, who is going to do that? What are the requirements of the person that is able to assess the risk and is able? Why, if we have multiple security levels in our security programs, why don't we have multiple levels in our Sherlock Holmes? Because Sherlock is in a serious problem, because he has to address all the risk for all these elements. And he has to maintain the transparency. So you can understand that I'm very much in favor of third-party assurance, which is a success in the car industry, but should also be applied in IT, because if we have certified manufacturers in the IT business, we might end up in the same problems as they had in the car industry. So these three elements are extremely important to me. So what? This is already my final slide. You ain't seen nothing yet in terms of digital development. So what we are doing here right now is pretty crucial for the development of our society. If we look on the planet, we see large regions where cybersecurity means something completely different than what we think about this issue in Europe. So we have something to defend. We are the largest market in the world, and we really have something to defend, so we better put in our best effort. The new technology will be extremely difficult to control because we will see an enormous amount of new systems. We will see an enormous amount of interconnectivity. I have everything connected in my home right now. The sun screens, the heating of my bathroom, my oven, you know, I like that kind of stuff, so I also make it work. But I find it, even in my home, extremely difficult to control. Imagine that our traffic, the complexity of our traffic systems in a few years from now will be amazingly complex, very difficult to control. A handful of people will become extremely rich from lack of control. So what I always see is in this type of certificate development, you will see parties involved, call them the car industry, where you have to keep in mind that transparency is not an element of their success. So you will see them say things like, oh, but that is something that we've already done, or we have these marvelous processes in place. Don't you believe them? So transparency is a major issue in any certification scheme. You always, and that is difficult because a certificate is in the end only, you know, this is my certificate. It's not telling you anything about what is behind the certificate. It's just that it is. So we should try to open up the black box of the certificate, like the crash test of the car, where it's, and there you can see the crash. So be aware, please do not believe everybody who's involved. Society will have to adapt, because our society will change dramatically through these new systems. And it's what I already said. Keep transparency at all costs, and make sure that we have the right people, the right Sherlock Holmes, the right cybersecurity experts that are able to tell you that these are the risks at stake. And then third party is an absolute key in making the world safer, because certifications can also mean that your world will be more unsafe if you're not doing this well. That is my message of this presentation. So in fact, it's very simple. If you keep a few things in mind, then the certification scheme is great. And if you do not watch out, it can be very dangerous too. Do we have time for questions, or?
I was thinking of leaving the questions to the end.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Thank you, Egon. So, just a few simple things to keep mind of. So, our next speaker is Mr. Ali Hessami, currently Director of Research and Development and Innovation at Vega Systems. Ali is an expert in the systems assurance and safety, security, sustainability, and knowledge assessment management methodologies, and has a background in design and development of advanced control systems for businesses and safety-critical industrial applications. Ali is also a visiting professor at London City University Center for Systems and Control, in the School of Engineering and Mathematics, and at Beijing Jiaotong University School of Electronics and Information Engineering. His talk is entitled An Overview of the Guidelines for the Ethical Design of Modern Systems and Services. Ali, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aris. And with my appreciation to the hard effort of organizing this event and inviting myself, I would like to share two facets of my current work with the audience of this summer school. One actually to do with cybersecurity work that I'm currently doing within the context of European Union standardization regime in CENELEC. And secondly, aspects of my work in what's called ethics in technology, standardization, and certification. Starting with the first part, I would also highlight that whatever I say here in the context of my work are my personal opinion and not attributable to the organizations for which I do the work. The outline of my talk is largely some form of definitions before we get started, followed by reference to ethical issues, and then reference to standards and certification program and some ideas about the way forward. First part of the talk focuses on cybersecurity, and the essence of this relates to the work that I currently do as a member of a European standardization group working on developing cybersecurity protection standards for railway applications across the European Union. This is referred to as a technical specification 50701 that would hopefully be completed this year, and it is fundamentally based on an international industrial automation and control systems, or IACS standard called IEC 62443. The 50701 standard is derived, as I mentioned, from the IEC standard, because IEC standard is an incredibly comprehensive and global norm for managing the cybersecurity of automation and control production systems. It sits within the operational technology part of the total landscape. So basically, as you can see, we have the business enterprise zone, which is largely controlled and, if you like, certified and assured against ISO standards such as 27000 series. And where our standard in Europe is being developed is largely within the context of operational technology of the railways as an adaptation of the major global standard. The mandate was issued roughly 3 years ago. We've gone through 3, believe it or not, working groups to develop this standard. But I'm pleased to say it is nearing completion. The work that I laid within the context of this European standard is develop a reference model. What is cybersecurity? What's the context? What are the essential components that are influenced by this? What are the foundational requirements? What are the essential characteristics of products and systems, or components and systems, that will be, if you like, evaluated, need to be built in and then evaluated and certified against. And if I may focus on this side, what are the fundamental security design principles? I often find in the context of security, and particularly cybersecurity, technology as a flashy item seems to overtake our senses in commonality of understanding and being sensible about comprehensive level of assurance. What I would really, as a message from the work that I've done for this standard, is that it is absolutely essential to focus on the right design principles. And I'll tell you a few things about the work we've done here. It's not the technology that wins and provides security, it's our principles, it's our wisdom, and it's our approach and architecting. A quick overview of the IEC standard, which is the foundation of the work that we have adopted for European Railway Security Standard. This is a 14-part standard in 14-component standard in 4 parts. It covers the general issues of cyber and security, definitions, metrics, etc. Then it talks about policies and procedures in terms of what are the requirements for IACS, industrial automation and control systems, what are the implementation issues, what are maintenance issues, patch management, real-time maintenance issues. Then it goes into part 3 and 4, which are the major parts of this extensive suite of standards. One deals with system-level security, cybersecurity, and part 4 deals with component-level security. The IC standard, the IACS standard, actually comes with a reference model which paints, if you like, a roadmap and a universe of discourse for the standard, and actually shows you what are the conduits and the zones that the standard applies to in a typical architectural manner. It also paints a life cycle issue. We heard from Aris the necessity to cover issues in a comprehensive and totality of the life cycle manner, rather than just deployment phase or maintenance phase, etc. The IEC standard also comes with its own life cycle, and it splits between supply chain as well as the developers, and goes into specification, integration, operation and maintenance, and decommissioning. I have been involved in the standardization for, at least in the European context, for roughly 25 years. And I would say that when we talk about life cycle, it's nowhere as important as cybersecurity to also focus on decommissioning. It's not just unplugging a machine and throwing it on the scrap heap. We are there to ensure that no influential and critical information are left in the products and systems that we decommission. I promised I mentioned we worked on 3 fundamental aspects of this standard, not entirely the whole standard. The 3 fundamental aspects were what is the reference model for the railway, and my honest recommendation from the work that the subgroups that I chair did is wherever you adopt cybersecurity or security, you need a reference model. You need a total landscape perspective. If you don't have that, you leave it to people's imagination and you would always miss something. So here's a reference model that our group produced, largely relating to asset. We've got another reference model for the operational aspect. The second part was on what we call foundational system security requirements. These, again, we heard from introductory talk by the chair, Aris, that we need to have a set of comprehensive set of requirements. In the language of IEC 62443, these are referred to as foundational requirements. And this is a rather unprecedented approach to security engineering or to system engineering, in the sense that the standard doesn't say you have your own, you have your product, you analyze it, find the risks, find the fixes, and demonstrate that you have controlled your risks. Unlike many of the system safety and security standards, this particular set of cybersecurity standards are actually putting specific demands, so-called security by design. You need to tackle access control in terms of identification and authentication. You need to tackle use control. You need to tackle issues relating to system integrity, data confidentiality, restricted data flow in a system to minimize accessibility, timely response in terms of operational risk management and resource availability. The totality of these 7 classes of so-called foundational security requirements constitute, if you like, a comprehensive set of what people are supposed to do and build in their products and services from a hub to a major data center. And each one of these foundational requirements comprises many tens of detailed requirements, specifics of what needs to go into the design. In the work that we did, adapting from the IEC environment for pan-European application in Senelec, I developed a template in order to simplify also the issue of how do we come up with design principles in security. What is important is that if you search the literature for security, there are sporadic references, there are some, if you like, humanity's accumulated wisdom about security. And that is what we aim to do. We looked at IEC, and unfortunately, they were completely discarded this particular concept, that as if wisdom of security didn't matter, all that matters is all this set of foundational requirements, and all I had to do is to go through the design, deliver all of those, and hopefully you get a certificate that you have achieved it. So we set about finding a comprehensive set of wisdoms, insights, historic experiences coming from different sources, not just from electronics and software engineering, etc., that constitutes assurance of security. We devised a template so that our members, people who were tasked with this, knew exactly what to do. And this is an overview of the security design principles. So I'm really pleased to say enormous effort, very hard work, accumulation, research, and as well as putting some material together, we came up with 17 separate security design principles. Now, what I would really refer to these are the wisdom of security. These are not the technology of security. These are the ones which underpin our trust in how effective our technical solutions are going to be. You can see for yourself, securing the weakest link, defense in depth, fail secure, all the way to trusted components. In fact, even though we are working within the context of Senelec and a European standard for a railway sector, which is like in many other sectors heavily digitized, the developers of IEC standard, which is a global standard, were impressed by this set, and they have taken a copy of this to incorporate in the main standard. So we are really proud to be influencing, if you like, development of global cybersecurity standard from the work that we have done in Europe. And here's an example of security design principle. This particular one is securing the weakest link. And we've got an annex in our emerging standard, which actually describes what the purpose is, what are the guidelines for implementation. And the fundamental thing is, as I mentioned earlier, there are a set of foundational requirements, secure by design, that the designers and developers and operators have to bear in mind. And now we have a rationale for it. These security principles are actually the reason for those foundational requirements. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of recommended things that people have to do because somebody says so. The second part of my talk, I would like to refer to another stream of work that I'm currently involved in on so-called ethics and technology, and it involves also a certification program. And not forgetting, the second reason for incorporating this is that security is fundamentally under the banner of ethics and technology. I would skip some of the generic parts such as definitions. You all know that ethics is a branch of knowledge that deals with our moral values and principles, and the morals are actually knowing where things are right or wrong. There are fundamentally three principal ethics theories. One is referred to as consequentialism or utilitarianism by John Stuart Mill. That is kind of a, if you like, utility function, bringing maximum wellness and happiness for the society. The other one is a duty or deontological school by Immanuel Kant, where it focuses on the maxims of the leadership of an organization in caring for the social value and social impact. And finally, Aristotle with virtue ethics, where he considers that this is largely a character quality by people that need to be borne in mind. There are many challenges. The least of all is that ethics, which is now becoming almost as popular, and in my humble opinion, before long, more popular than cybersecurity, is that it's still in the domain of philosophy, as I mentioned, and not exactly in the context of technology, so that we can actually assure it, measure it, certify it, and encourage developers. IEEE is the world's largest global technical professional organization with roughly 450,000 members in 160 countries. So it is a very large global entity. It has got a standardization entity within it, and there is an initiative called Global Initiative, and they have started a few years ago with what we call ethically aligned design, or EAD. EAD is fundamentally on three pillars of universal human values: political self-determination and technical dependability, and is supported by a number of roughly 8 principles. This is a publication by IEEE that's published earlier this year. It's free for access. You can all refer to IEEE.org and you get a copy of EAD. And many global institutions, public and private, are actually using this as a basis for developing their own policies and approach. The second part that is happening within the sphere of IEEE is a standard on offering a process for addressing ethical concerns during system design. Now, here we are aiming to develop guidelines and a process that can be certified at the end of the day for anyone who is developing products and services that has social impact. That could be a medical system, that could be a transport system, that could be a security system, indeed. So P7000 is the label of this standard, and it has got a defined process for manufacturers, for suppliers, for service providers, in order to be able to not only, similar to security by design, is ethics by design. It actually incorporating ethics right from the concept stage into the product definition, in product specification, development, and deployment, etc. So we would not have surprises downstream. We have a typical standards organization for this. Work is ongoing, and we are hoping to finalize this global standard, which is not sector specific. It's not about a particular part of industry or government or private and public sector. It's a global standard for anyone who is developing any technology, software, hardware, service, and ethics. There's also 13 other standards in the IEEE standardization environment that are addressing different facets: transparency of autonomous systems, accountability, data privacy, ethically driven nudging for robotics, etc. So these standards are aiming to cover the rest of the spectrum of ethical concerns for forthcoming technology, digital revolution, and technologies that are emerging, from artificial intelligence all the way to security and safety. The final part is a certification program that IEEE is running. This is called Ethics Certification Program for Autonomous and Intelligent Systems. Applies indeed to just about anything that has got autonomy or artificial intelligence embedded in it, from autonomous cars, which would be populating our roads before long, to provision of public and private services. The certification program is based on an assurance framework that we heard about, also applied to cybersecurity. We have a framework within which we are basically aiming in 3 areas of certification for ethical behavior. One is accountability. The second part is transparency, and the third part is algorithmic bias. These are the areas that some even major public organizations, governments have partnered with IEEE and requested that there are certification programs rapidly developed because they are in the process of buying products and services, and there is no quality kite mark similar to ISO 9001 for quality, for ethics, for ethical design and ethical features of products and services that governments are aiming to purchase. So these are the 3 areas we're currently covering under our certification program, and it is currently generic, and we aim to then focus on sector-specific, such as medical, government services, social services, etc. And we can extend this. Timeline is that towards the end of the year, we'll have these 3 certification programs completed. They are very fast-track developments at the moment, and we are hoping that it would be launched by early 2020. One particular aspect is that we are not using the traditional standard development process for this certification program. We are developing at very high speed and through some competency arrangement and a specific expert groups, model-based certification program. So we are developing a model of what are the essential foundational requirements for ethical properties of transparency, accountability, and lack of algorithmic bias in systems and services. Most of you who are aware of the standardization work are aware that a typical standard, including the one I referred to in the earlier part of my talk, has taken 3 years to produce. So we don't have that much time, and we don't have the luxury to wait for these products and services and some global corporations to take advantage of our personal data and turn it into a commodity. So we are aiming to rapidly develop these and launch this. So in conclusion, my view is that humanity has reached a stage that our destiny is heavily intertwined. Wherever we are, our work, our lifestyle, byproducts of our existence are really affecting each other. It is essential that the public good and social impact sits alongside and hopefully in medium term transcends pure focus on commercial gains. These are not contradictory. It is possible to have commercial gain as well as care for the society. The ethical approach that includes so far safety, and now we're talking about security and hopefully social values, as we are discussing currently in the 3 works that I've referred to, are actually impactful. They are not independent, they are not just for facade. And ideally, we need to encourage most enterprises, private and public sector, to go beyond minimum conformity assessment. We need to really start encouraging them and changing the culture so that they go for the social good. And as we have already stated, similar to safety, that's traditionally the focus of most standardization and certification, security is also another ethical issue. So it fits within the framework that we are talking about. What I also try to highlight is that in security is the wisdom and architecting and, if you like, the wholesome nature of our approach rather than hype and the exact flashy technology that we use, because as we heard again, we need to have means suitable for the ends. There is no universal silver bullet and solution. Therefore, ultimately, to make all of this a success, not only we need a holistic system, it needs to be auditable and hopefully certifiable by independent and impartial bodies in order to give credit to those who have adopted the recommended approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, for that excellent talk on reminding us the meaning behind our work. Now, before I introduce our next speaker, just a logistics point that lunch will be served at about noon, so just bear that in mind and do not just rush off. And as Massimo will be our last speaker, it's now time to make sure you have prepared the hardest questions for our excellent speakers. So our next speaker, Massimo Felici, which is one of the first people I got to know when I came to Brussels, holds a PhD in computer science from the University of Edinburgh in the UK and a master in computer science from the University of Catania in Italy. He is advising European institutions and European agencies such as ENISA and EU LISA. Massimo has over 15 years of extensive expertise in the area of the NIS Directive, risk assessment, certifications, and policy-driven research and innovation. His talk is entitled Cybersecurity at Scale for Digital Enterprises. Massimo?
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. And I'll try to bring a different kind of perspective to the discussion, and it's probably a bit more, I would say, pragmatic, or what we see in industry happening across different kind of sectors. And this is a brief overview of the talk. So what we see in terms of technology trends. So at the end, like, is the certification scheme and framework has to apply to different types of technology, as has been emphasized, different types of industries. The objective at the end, it will be still cybersecurity. And also, like, is one of the things I wanted to emphasize inside the talk is also the scale. And this is something that all organizations we are dealing, both public, private organization, and at the same time as individuals as well. And just looking at what has been just adopted, the Cybersecurity Act. So one of the key discussions I would like to bring is what are the challenges that we are facing in establishing the practices around the Cybersecurity Act, and in particular, like the Cybersecurity Certification Framework. And those challenges is something that all together we have to address. And giving a bit more comprehensive view of what we see cybersecurity. First of all, like, is you will see, like, is in Deloitte, like, we look at technology trends all across kind of different kind of industries, but we see how technology is developed, and at the same time how technology is adopted across different kind of industries. And this is just a small reference to a report that you can download, and it gives an overview of what we see across different kind of organizations in terms of technology trends. And what are the key aspects of technology? This is really my personal view on where we see technology is going. So there is an increasing complexity of technology. So it's something that complexity will not go away. And actually, is the way technology nowadays is becoming like more and more complex due to the fact that more functionalities, as was mentioned before, also like is more power in specific kind of devices, and combining different types of technology as well. So there is an increasing complexity of both products, services, and processes. And also, I will emphasize also the supply chain as well. So it's not becoming simpler. And there is an increasing coupling of this technology. So it's more and more embedded in our life, in our business environments. So that means is becoming like more to some extent risky overall, because we cannot live without technology anymore. Our business activities, our societies rely very much on technologies. And the result of this is we have an increasing surface, technological surface to protect. So this is valid for all organizations, public and private. So the surface is not going to become smaller, so we have to protect more. Characterization, also another aspects of technology that we see is technologies are without boundaries. The typical kind of approach of security tends to protect. So, which is we try to put a box or some mechanism around something that we want to protect. Nowadays, it's becoming more and more difficult to identify what are those boundaries, in particular because technologies cross different kind of organizations. And the aspect of this is, for instance, more and more we're dealing with technologies that is multi-ownership. So it's, at the end, we don't really own per se a system or any technologies. Most of the time is the combination of different kind of ownership of individual, at the individual components level. Multi-tenancies, we are not anymore kind of the only users of technologies or any kind of services. Most of the times we share the same kind of technology services with other users, other tenants. And usually nowadays is a mix of proprietary and open source technologies, in particular if you look at software services. So it's not anymore like it's an individual organization that is responsible for any individual piece of technology that is probably in your device. There is a mix of proprietary and open source technologies. And we know also that open source is becoming also embedded in many different kind of organizations. And finally, like is a final aspect of the way I describe like is where technology is going is I look at the economic aspect of technology. This is something it's quite I'm very interested in this aspect. So in particular, like there's an increasing impact of cyber attack. So, and this is not, again, it's not becoming smaller and smaller. So all our organizations will be exposed more to cyber attacks. And at the same time, the impact of the cyber attacks is increasing as well. And another aspect is what I personally call is the paradox of the economics of cybersecurity. If you look at all our organizations, and we're investing more in cybersecurity. In reality, is what's happening is due to the fact that we have to protect more, the investment per critical assets is not really increasing with the same pace. So all organizations, we are facing the same kind of problem. We have to protect more with less. That's the reality. So there is no other way because we are the first kind of reason for this happening because we are adopting more and more technologies. Our organization are adopting more and more technologies, our society. But in reality, the investment is not at the same level of the adoption of technologies. And that's, again, what I call this the paradox of economics of cybersecurity. Despite the spending, even at the European level, so we still have to protect more. And finally, like threats is continuous evolving. So it's not something that we can rely. We have to always adapt to emerging threats. This is just to give you an idea of why, like, what the kind of complex and what the kind of scale that often, like, we deal. And this is coming from the World Economic Forum, is how much data is generated per day. And this is just is a snapshot of how many data our organizations like generates per day. So what's the kind of, in reality, when we talk about digital economy, we're talking about digital system, we're talking like it's data. Data are our main assets. So, and I'll tell you like this is just a partial figure in my view, because there are majority of data is also generated not just by us, but it's starting to be generated by the system that we use. So it's system generated. There are more systems out there that communicates each other and generates more and more data. So this is just to give an idea why the complexity and the scale of the surface is continuing increasing. Looking at the Cybersecurity Act, this is just some extracts. Of course, was just adopted on 27th of June, and just looking at what are things that when I started to review that drew to my attention. In particular, like is because as a company that we want to support organizations to become more cyber secure, we have to understand what are the means to become more cyber secure. So first of all was the relevance. So the cybersecurity certification framework will apply to ICT product, services, and processes. So defining the scopes, so as was mentioned by Aris, so it will be a collection of different kind of framework certification schemes. So it will be not just one. So we have to work to understand what is suitable and what is not. Among the security objectives, and this again is my personal interpretation when we talk about data, so there are specific kind of security objectives that of course may need to, may overlap with other kind of legislative frameworks like such as the GDPR in case of personal data, if we're talking about systems that deal with personal data. Assurance level, so it's kind of, the framework will foresee 3 different kind of assurance levels, and the way they are like is basic, substantial, and high. Of course, it seems that there is a sort of a linear incremental of the required assurance for each of the kind of for different kind of systems, or what kind of assurance level is required. But probably like is in reality, achieving like an higher assurance level is not like such a linear kind of incremental. So the kind of effort may be required is more substantial. And of course, as part of the cybersecurity communities and the standardization body, would be also responsible for identifying and clarifying what are the evaluation criteria that will apply to products, services, and processes, and at the same time also what are the methods for assessing those. So there are still these kind of good practices that need to emerge, both from the standardization community, but also from the practitioner community as well. And of course in collaboration with agencies such as ENISA, of course, who has the mandate. And one of the things that is mentioned is in the certification framework that will be voluntary. This is, in my personal opinion, something is a bit controversial because at the end, what will happen is the certification scheme, in my view, will have an impact in defining the market. That will be the European market, protect the European market, but should be eventually, probably will become a requirement eventually. So, but this is my personal view. So looking at what we just saw, what we see as challenges and opportunities. So in terms of, so we have to deal with the complexity. So in scoping the ICT products and services and processes. So this is something that every time we want to certify any products, services, and process, we need to scope what we are certifying. So it won't be easy to certify everything or very complex system altogether. So the scoping will be a necessary part of the certification, of course. And this is due to the complexity. So dealing with different types of products, services, and processes, and this is was already mentioned, so it means is there will be as a collection of certification framework. So it means is just to give an example, what kind of systems may be certified eventually, like is so cybersecurity certification of connected and autonomous devices, such as, for example, IoT. This was mentioned. So there will be like is the necessity to define what are the suitable certification schemes for IoT. Other types of services that we may want to certify, like is cybersecurity certification of virtualized ICT services, such as, for example, cloud services. So, of course, in this case, the kind of certification that we expect will be different or adapted to the specific kind of complexity. But another types of systems, services, and products that we may want to certify are, I think it's what I classify them as a smart kind of products. So most of the time behind the keyword smart, what is connected is something like the emergence of artificial intelligence, machine learning adoptions. So the questions will be, what are suitable kind of certification schemes for types of products, services, and process that do not have a predefined behavior. So it's something that may evolve over time. And also, so of course there will be probably a necessity to compare different alternative certification schemes and what will be the validity of certification. For instance, the previous speakers mentioned many times safety. For safety critical systems, what's happened is most of the time, in case of an incident or an accident in the worst case, so certification gets revoked. So one of the questions will be also the case for cybersecurity. In case of critical cybersecurity kind of incident, may the certification be revoked for the specific types of system. What are the opportunities that we see is risk-driven organizational cybersecurity strategies. So certifications of products and adoption of systems should be part of a broader kind of risk-driven strategy of organization. So it's something that is really embedded like inside the organization. So the certification per se won't guarantee the security of an organization. So this is something having a more comprehensive view. And harmonizing cybersecurity market, for me, this is something that could be an opportunity. What we see at the moment across different sectors is still cybersecurity quite fragmented. So having probably a certification frameworks may help to having a bit of harmonization of cybersecurity as a whole. So at the moment, it's very difficult to say, okay, who is secure, who is not, and whether like is organizations that adopt like is security technologies may how do compare themselves. And as part of the certification as well, I will put also a broader kind of comprehensive view that this is governance risk and compliance framework. So the objective of having like a certification will be also take into account harmonizing like different kind of elements of compliance that can be monitored by organizations themselves. I'm talking here also in terms of an organizations that adopt this kind of technology as well. And also like certification should not be an end, but should be a means for achieving cybersecurity. So that's why our view is that we should also move using the certification schemes to move towards like an evidence-driven continuous cybersecurity operation assurance. At the end, what we want is that the certified systems are secure in operations, in our operation environments. A final view of the way we perceive like is in a complex organizations. So this is just to give an idea. You will find also this paper also in the reference I gave you at the beginning. So for us is when we talk about technology and in general like is we never forget that technology is just one aspect. So we want to take this into account also as a more comprehensive view. So we see also that security, and this is also hopefully what a certification may help as well. We also increase the culture, cybersecurity culture. What is our practices, the cybersecurity practice of organizations, and at the same time, what are the kind of tools? The way we see is like there will be like it's necessary to have together with the instruments such as certifications, we need to take into account like cybersecurity in a comprehensive way, looking at people, processes, technology, and governance. So in our role, like is when we advise different organizations, that's what we try to bring as well. Final kind of remarks, and these are wants to be as a kind of a more constructive vision, like is so, and this is intentionally I wrote them as a bit of statements or a bit kind of messages that the way I see myself cybersecurity going. So embrace technology evolution. So no matter what, we will take, our technologies will be adopted by any organizations. It's just a matter of time. So there is no private, public organization that eventually will avoid. So we have to take a constructive step. Think at scale. So it means is don't try to protect just a little part of your organizations. Think also that a broader kind of context. And this is kind of the digital economy will keep growing, and also like the data that we have to protect as well. Address the challenges, some of those that I mentioned, like is, so as I say, like is the cybersecurity certification framework will provide a means for enhancing cybersecurity. Develop opportunities, in particular, like is as a risk-driven organization, cybersecurity strategies, and also a comprehensive view of governance, risk, and compliance together as part of organization. And that's also the way I see it. Move beyond certification. That doesn't mean like is that you have to stop there. Take into account also your operational needs. Use certifications as a means to enhance your cybersecurity as a whole. And finally, like is think about also cybersecurity as a whole. So take into account also a secure culture in your organization, practices and tools all together. Thank you.
Thank you, Massimo. So thank you to all the speakers for their very enlightening and interesting talks. So now I turn it over to you, our audience, for your questions. Are there any questions? And yes, go ahead, sir.
Hello, my name is Sebastian. I'm from the permanent representation of Romania. And thank you for all the speakers for your presentation. I've done some research in my personal time, and I was doing some legal research about the Internet of Things and about critical infrastructure, and how easy it is to set up a botnet, you know, and then to launch a DDoS attack against a nuclear power plant or something like that. And my conclusion was that we have the technology there to protect the Internet of Things. We have the legal basis to protect the Internet of Things, but we are lacking of education. We are talking here about certification schemes, we are talking about IT audit, we are talking about how to make companies better and more secure. But when you think about, let's say, my grandma that would buy a smart fridge, and then my grandma would not know how to change the default password of that fridge might end up into a botnet and might attack a power plant. How can we teach people to have this kind of digital skills and to behave in a proper way, as if I would buy a car, I need an insurance? So going back to your presentation regarding the parallel with the cars. When I buy a car, I need an insurance, right? Because I need to be insured in front of an accident. But why not, when I'm buying a fridge, I don't need an insurance, or I'm not obliged somehow to change the default password, or that password to be changed by the manufacturer, or to have some kind of a mechanism? Thank you very much.
So before I pass on maybe to Egon to answer the question, I would just like to say that, you know, be careful what you wish for, because your grandmother will be calling you to start changing the passwords every now and then. So Egon, would you like to take this question?
I like this question very much, Sebastian. I also just bought an oven, and the level of technology surprises me, and that's why I also emphasize third-party assurance, because I think that from the oven manufacturers or the home security manufacturers, it will never reach a level where I think the public will be satisfied. And that means that we need certification schemes, but we also need the rule that at some stage a third party will assure that this is really at an appropriate, like the NCAP with our car crash safety, will make sure that it has a certain security level, and that when you're also focused on the risk level of your grandmother, when she makes the system active, that it will help her and that the third party assures her that it will work in a safe way, and hopefully also in a transparent way, because the oven right now is extremely non-transparent. You know, you really don't know what's happening. So, yeah.
But another factor that I think is also relevant to Ali's talk is that of security wisdom, and security needs to be usable, and the ethics. So I would turn to Ali and ask him, in his view, is it a good, expectation that we need to educate our grandmothers to change passwords, or is that a bad design principle that should be addressed elsewhere? So instead of spending hours on our grandmother, maybe somebody else should be spending hours on finding a way which doesn't require our grandmother to learn that particular skill. Ali, would you like to address that?
I think we have been talking about holism, and we are, quite rightly, as my colleagues here have highlighted, we are facing an increasingly complex and almost runaway technology where we are going to be, if you like, victims of many products and systems we don't even understand, we are just users. As part of that holism, I would, because of the projects I'm doing within IEEE, I'm referred to as ethical certification and standardization. The facet that you refer to pretty much fits within our P7000 ethics in design standard. If there is a social impact on minorities, on elderly, on the young, on the disabled, whatever, that needs to be borne in mind in design, in development, in rolling out, and as a solution. First of all, therefore, there are some standards in the making that would handle that kind of concern that you have. And unfortunately, so far, most of our effort, 2,000 years of civilization, we've reached a stage where the entire legal system is based on safety. So long as we don't hurt people, we are okay. So I have been involved, as I said, in standardization within the European and international context for many years, and that is the focus of much of the work. Safety standard on this medical device, on transport, etc., etc. Actually going towards the next step of encouraging the developers, the service providers to care for the values of the society, to me, is the next stage of civilization. It is not just about don't kill people, don't hurt them, but get away. Most of the unethical behaviors by major multinational corporations that I don't need to mention because you all have a good view of who they are and what they do in personalizing our data, profiling us, and selling it as product, as a data economy to others, are unfortunately just about legal but hugely unethical. We do not have sufficient and robust foundation for controlling the ethics of technology. We are just worried about, does it hurt somebody? And if it hit, who gets to pay the fine? So as a solution, my view is that the holism needs to take into account the governance. The governance of the technology should be as important as is safety, security, sustainability, environmental friendliness, etc. And the governance includes, are people affected by this? Do they understand? Do they need extra simple instructions? Do they need training? And does the training is one size fits all, or do we need one for the grandma, one for technician, one for managers, et cetera, et cetera. So ideally, my recommendation is, and that's what we are building into our ethics certification program, enormous focus on the governance aspect, and not just how to design an ethical product, but once you designed it, how does it go into service? How do you maintain assurance level throughout its life? And what are your duties towards various stakeholders? If you cannot deliver those duties, technically, as far as I'm concerned, people shouldn't be certified.
Thank you, Ali. Rafael.
Good morning. My name is Rafael Tesoro. I work in the Commission. I have a question for Ali. On this, I found this very interesting, the ethics strand in the IEEE. My question would be about the granularity of this, because I understood the group is making progress, and hopefully beginning 2020 there will be a scheme or whatever in place to certify what? This is my question. You mentioned products. Which is the granularity? For example, is it software product, hardware product, systems? Would algorithms be certified? What's the scope? Can you give us a little bit more insight on that?
Currently, 3 areas are being worked on in developing a fast-track certification program so far as ethical properties of products and services generically are concerned. These are transparency of products and services. Are all the decisions made transparent? Is there sufficient clarity, documentation, audit record, trail, etc. The other one is on accountability and responsibility. So did the organization or group that produced the product or service actually take into account human rights and social impact, etc., and are they accountable and the responsibility levels spelled out in structure and organization? And the third part is freedom from algorithmic bias. Most of these automated systems, and especially smart, intelligent, autonomous systems that embed so-called AI, which is a bad term, but never mind, it's popular, so we refer to it as AI, basically have various degrees of bias. When we automate our services, from medical service to social service to educational service, unless we check these systems from design and delivery and stakeholder perspective, we won't be aware that it may actually undermine the rights of a disabled person, not distinguish between a child and an adult and an old or disabled person, etc., etc. And on one hand, we have best of intentions in terms of governments and public institutions to roll out automated services so that people get better quality of service available 24/7. On the other hand, if there are embedded biases on race, gender, ability, etc., these actually become counterproductive and socially unacceptable. So these 3 areas are currently being developed in terms of what are the foundational ethical requirements necessary for a developer or service provider or duty holder to claim their product is free from unacceptable level of algorithmic bias, for example, in provision of health services to a community in Vienna City, for example. The people who are requesting these are, believe it or not, governments, city-states, public institutions, ministries, as well as commercial enterprises. Now, what is exactly being certified? At the moment, these 3 processes are being developed at a fast pace and are very much welcome. If people who have interest in this do write to me, I can engage you in some of the work so that you begin to increase your insight. The products, the certification process are fairly generic, but there would be then sectorized. So we would have lack of, say, algorithmic bias in health sector, lack of algorithmic bias in local decision-making by local government, lack of algorithmic bias in whatever other context, banking sector, etc. So for the time being, they are generic. They are applicable to products, services, and complete integrated systems. So we refer to a box, to a provision of an online service that somebody logs in and latches on to a local service provided by a local government or a company, to a complete integrated system such as a data center. These are going to be launched early 2020, and the certification won't be by IEEE necessarily itself. We are developing the process. We'll be giving these to competent global certification authorities who would be independent bodies who would take our guidelines and certify products and services embedding autonomy and intelligent systems, AI, globally for anyone who is interested.
Thank you, Ali. Any other questions from the floor?
Thank you for the presentations. Georgios Tselentis from the Unity 3 DG Connect Next Generation Internet. You mentioned the need for, Arius, you mentioned the need for national accreditation in the certification process. Can this be done can this be done by an international or intergovernmental entity, this type of accreditation? How, if you can elaborate a little bit more on this?
So the accreditation of the conformity assessment bodies in the Cybersecurity Act follows that in the other existing market regulation. So you need a national accreditation body, which is a national body. There's one per member state, and that body has the authority to accredit. So the quick answer is no. The accreditation can only be done in each member state by the designated national accreditation body.
So this is Kyriakos Atlas from CERT-EU. I don't know if it's just an opportunity for me to ask something that might fall out of the scope of this university. I want to know. I want just to know what are your feedback on the blueprint. So I'm taking this opportunity to ask whether, as a team, as a unit, you are happy with the implementation of the blueprint. We can leave the question, if you don't think it's relevant, we can leave it for another.
So for those of you that may not be aware, the blueprint is what we call the Commission recommendation for the coordinated response to large-scale cybersecurity incidents and crises at an EU level. I would argue that perhaps this is not the session, so we can discuss it a bit later. Any other questions? Yes.
Thanks again for the floor. I was wondering, in the Commission's opinion, and then of course in the industry's opinion, how can industry cooperate with the Commission, maybe with academia, with the implementation of the EU certification scheme? And until now, there are some partnerships between these three main actors, but do you think that with the EU Cybersecurity Act, will this improve? Will these three main actors, academia, decision-making process, the Commission and industry, will work more together in achieving, let's say, more resilient and more cybersecurity for the EU and then for the world? Do you think that will be improved? Thank you.
Well, we would certainly hope so. So the Cybersecurity Act provides many opportunities for industry and academia to contribute. So either in the expert groups, but of course, certification needs standards. And I think it's clear from Ali's presentation and others that, of course, industry and academia develop on standards. Then the future schemes or the standards of the future need academic work to better improve requirement setting, design, principles, architectural. So the Cybersecurity Act, I mean, apart from the individual schemes that will be developed, can also serve as a hub for EU-wide, at least, if not global, discussions around concepts as assurance, confidence, trust in technology. Some of those may trickle down into standards and schemes, but the overall, let's say, quest in light of all this complexity and the other developments that our speakers have. So I'm sorry to say, Egon, that it'll probably not be finished by the time you retire. It's an ongoing, let's say, kind of race, depending, on whether you're an optimist or how you see things. But it's an ongoing process. Security is a process, not an end result. So again, the Cybersecurity Act will focus and bring together all stakeholders that have an interest in discussing these issues much more broadly than just in the context of setting up individual schemes. And it's clear that we need those discussions. Now, are there any other questions? Sorry, we have a question? Go ahead.
Hello, I have a question to Massimo Felici. In the last slide, you mentioned move already beyond certification. I'd like to ask you what more we can do, or in which direction more we can do.
Maybe the certification gives us foundations, so to standardize what are the security requirements for specific types of product services. But my personal view is that we need to have a more kind of operational view. So start to monitor constantly the kind of product and services. So this is, for instance, looking at how those kind of requirements are met in operation, and at the same time are linked also to the objectives at the organization level. So that's why we look at evidence-driven. So when we certify products, it's not an end. So we have to keep monitoring the behavior of the products into operation environments. And this would be also part of the responsibility of organizations as well, both on the production side and also on the end user side. So the certification will give us a framework that we can monitor alongside other kind of security best practices as well. Thank you.
Andrea De Mini, Commission. In general, software production has developed from handcraft to an industry, but in my opinion, compared with the rest of the manufacturing industry, is the software industry a sui generis industry, because the lack of, let's say, of the standards or liabilities and all whatever is around the manufacturing industry developed since with the experience since the Industrial Revolution. The point has been also briefly discussed in our other sessions of this year's summer school. My question is to the whole panel, if the certification could be a first step in order to push the industry to adapt to the functioning, say, that is present to the other branch of the industrial world in order to have, also because we were discussing with other colleagues during the sessions, that was clear that if the software industry would have the same standard in very general meaning of the word used in the rest of the manufacturing standard, most of the security breaches or issues present in everyday use of the software would not be present nowadays. So therefore I would be interested to have the opinion of the panel.
Well, I certainly hope that it will push the industry. And one of the reasons why I included transparency and third-party assurance is also that we open up the box. And I think that is absolutely crucial in software development, that we no longer depend on statements of the industry alone, but if they claim that certain elements are covered, that they invite a company like Deloitte and ask them, you know, we claim this, but give us third-party assurance on our claims. And I think that that will definitely make the world safer. And that is an important element of the Cybersecurity Act.
I often face the question when I talk about the topics that we've discussed today. People often get confused about enforceability of standards, roughly the context you're referring to. It's important to emphasize that only regulations, you come from that side, know much better. Our enforceable standards are voluntary codes produced for the best intent by industry and standardization organizations, and no one's obliged to follow these. The only mechanism I have seen that enforces it is to refer to these standards in the context of regulations and acts. Then that becomes mandatory and people have to do. The other facet, frankly, specifically dimensions such as ethics, is that not only we are hoping that once there are verifiable processes and certifiable processes developed, they would be used by government agencies, by local government and public services for procurement of their services. Within reason, if they appear within a contract, they become mandatory. If they are not there, if there is a huge body of standards out there from many global organizations, people don't pay much attention. The final aspect I would also highlight is that I am, as an optimist, sincerely hopeful that regulation would go back towards the public. Is the public demanding transparency, accountability, and clarity of intentions, and demanding that an organization actually comes clean and looks ethical, whether it's producing social networks, software engineering, or online services. It is ultimately the power of the public to shun the organizations that don't trust, and we have seen bad behavior by some of them not so long ago, and hopefully embrace those who perform better, more ethically, more accountable, more transparent, etc. So my ultimate hope is that once the education is at adequate level, it would be the public who would demand and enforce, and then industry has to adopt because they are vulnerable to market forces in that respect.
I just follow up on the same reasoning, like is for me, it would be at the end is whether it would be the public or public sectors or other types of industry, it would be the market eventually defining and having a push for the adoption of any certification. And for me, eventually, like it's clear that any certification has to be associated with a specific kind of market. So whether coming from the initial push from the public sector or the private one, cybersecurity and a certified cybersecurity should be also differentiated in the market. So for any kind of industries and services.
I'm very much in favor of a market. However, in the area of software and in the area of cyber, the market scares me a little bit. And I often see how easy people give their privacy away or security away. So even though I would be very much in favor of a market, I'm even more in favor of good cybersecurity rules, and that's why I am so enthusiastic about the Cybersecurity Act, and I think that Europe can really move boundaries there, because we like markets and we like a single digital market, but we also like a very safe market, and we want to take a government initiative over there to make a safer digital society, where I think other parts in the world depend more on market activity, and they think that consumers will change.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think, ladies and gentlemen, our time is up, but I would like to take a couple of minutes, first of all, to thank sincerely our speakers, and I think they deserve a round of applause from us. And of course, thank you for taking the time from your busy, as a colleague can possibly imagine, your busy schedule. But just to close answering the question on software, so I've been working on cybersecurity for quite some time, and for better or for worse, my mind is trained to identify problems and risks, which is always helpful in party conversations. But as so cybersecurity certification and these voluntary schemes can also help us come to an understanding of what good cybersecurity in different contexts would look like. Now, applying it in issues of liability or regulation needs a bit of attention, and a bit of even further scoping, because software is everything from the operating system on my laptop to open source somewhere on GitHub. So I think, again, it's an invitation, of course, to all colleagues involved, because software is eating the world, and insecure software is even worse. And I'm sure in all DGs are, your object is becoming more digital and software and hardware dependent. So it's an invitation to the entire Commission, of course, to help us along this journey. Of course, to industry and academia and standardization bodies to help us too. So hopefully, we will get better over time, or at least, manage the risks so the opportunities keep outweighing the dangers in our digital society. So with that, thank you very much.